Hey there, educators. Brian King here. I think this is probably my first live broadcast into this group, and I'm really excited about it because it starts with a fantastic question. One of your fellow educators posted this conundrum, and I think it's going to resonate with many of you. It goes like this. I have a student who is diagnosed with ADHD and is on medication. However, it is still incredibly difficult for him to pay attention. This fellow educator of ours feels at a loss because this student needs every single thing repeated to him. I can relate. At this point in the year, he still has difficulty following daily routines that are posted on the room. When she explains an assignment, she has to go to his desk and he hasn't started working and she has to explain to him yet again. And she's concerned that there's so much content in the lesson that he's missing because of his inability to pay attention. When she asks him an individual question or even say his name, there's a lag in his ability to respond. There seems to be some slower processing. She's tried to work with him individually when she can and wants to know what else she can do. All right, let's break this down. The first thing that's important to understand about ADHD is the difficulty that we have processing and prioritizing internal and external noise. There's two different varieties, okay? So, and keep in mind that the ADHD brain is an all or nothing brain. So you pay attention to all of it or none of it, hence hyperfocus. That tendency to be so captured in one activity that the rest of the world seems to not exist. Hyperfocus is a classic example of the all-in ability to focus of the ADHD mind. Or we space out, we don't care. And it's very difficult for us to find that gray area, especially in the younger minds. Not impossible, but harder to teach. So keep that in mind, okay? Another thing to keep in mind with the all or nothing mind is when a child's in the classroom, there's a lot happening in the classroom. Now, teachers that have pretty good executive functions, meaning those abilities to organize, prioritize what they want to pay attention to, filter things out, you don't catch everything that's happening in that room because your brain knows how to tune out the stuff that you've deemed irrelevant. The ADHD mind hears everything. It's all or nothing. So it prioritizes all of it. All of it's important. All the shiny stuff on the walls, all the sounds I'm hearing in the room next door, outside, in the hallway. It all matters. So you're competing against that. Okay? This is not a child that doesn't want to focus on you. This is a child that has a brain that does not know how to prioritize what to tune into. So the attention is going to the shiny thing over here and the shiny thing over there and the shiny thing back there, and the shiniest object wins. And unfortunately, sometimes it's not you. And it's not personal. It's the way the brain works. Now, medication can quiet down internal noise. We'll get to that in a minute. But it doesn't quiet external noise. It doesn't change the environment. The context hasn't changed. So you can give this kid all the meds you want, but it's not going to change what's happening in their environment. You with me? Okay. So what are examples of internal noise? Well, the first example is all those thoughts that bubble up throughout the day. We all have them. But one of the difficulties with the ADHD brain is there's also difficulty with impulse control. So you have all of these thoughts coming up and they all seem fantastic. And the impulse is to follow. Follow this one, follow that one, follow this one over here. So a combination of those two things makes it difficult to not only focus on what you've decided the child needs to prioritize on, but it also makes it difficult for the child to come back once their impulse has ordered them to chase yet another shiny object. Now again, medication can quiet both of those two things down so that your child can focus better. But it's usually not 100%. It's just an improvement. So next we need to move into, wait, let me add a little bit more. Notice how I bounce around, ADHD, anyone? Some other examples of internal noise, besides the thoughts, are things like bodily sensations, discomfort. Classroom chair is not the most comfortable place to sit in the world. It's the reality, I understand. Restlessness. Hyperactivity, ADHD. The restlessness, the need to move can be very disorienting, very distracting, and fatigue. You've been sitting for a long time and you need to move. Maybe you get a little tired or hunger. It's close to lunchtime. All I can think about is that PB&J. So it's very difficult to compete against that natural internal noise when you want to teach something. And worst case scenario, kid really has to go to the bathroom and you say, wait 15 minutes. Guess what? That kid don't care about what you have to say in the next 15 minutes. That kid's trying to not wet his pants. Your best bet is to let the kid go to the bathroom, especially if they have ADHD. You've lost them if their internal noise is much louder and shinier than what you're teaching. Okay? It's just a reality. Now, let's move on to external noise. Some examples of that are the obvious. Auditorily, people talking, someone rustling in their seat, messing with their backpack or their papers, sounds from outside in the hall, in the next room, outside on the playground. I remember growing up in Catholic school where the playground times, recess were staggered. And a lot of the kids could be heard screaming, and I could hear the ball hit the backboard. And all I could think about is how nice it is outside, how stuffy it is in here. I didn't care what the teacher was talking about. All I could think about was that experience I'd rather be having. It's a reality. There is also a tendency for a lot of visual noise. I don't know about your classroom, but I've been in some that have 20 things hanging from the ceiling, and when the AC kicks on, they start swinging. There's all these posters, bright visuals on the wall depicting the solar system and how cells divide and all this stuff. And that's noise, especially for a kid that's very visually driven. Not everybody with ADHD is. We all have different learning styles, but a visually driven child is going to find opportunities to look and gaze and hyper-focus and study those posters. Or if something's swinging from the ceiling, that can be very stimmy. Just to watch it swing back and forth can be very calming for a kid that has anxiety and restlessness. So they're going to be drawn to things like that. My advice, if possible, take the stuff down until you need it. Having that stuff up all the time can really create a lot of noise that you now have to compete with to get this child's attention. The temperature in the room. There's one young lady that I worked with a couple of years ago that her grades were up and down very, very erratically, and we could really recognize no pattern. And so I said to her, tell me about your day. And she said, well, I go to this class first, and I go to the next class, over here. And then at one point she mentioned, oh, but I always have to take my sweatshirt off because it's too hot in that class. I said, sweatshirt? You wear a sweatshirt every day? Yeah, I do. Why is that? Well, sometimes it's cold in this class and sometimes it's hot in that class. I said, do you always do the same thing with your sweatshirt? Do you always put it on or leave it off? And she wasn't tuned in to how she adapted to the temperature in each room. So I said to her, when it's cold, make sure you're wearing your sweatshirt. When it's warm, make sure you take it off. If you need to, make a note of the classes where this needs to happen. Because it was an older school and only the new part had air conditioning. So whenever she went into the cooler part, it was cold. When she was in the older part, it was hot. Guess what happened when she started wearing her sweatshirt or taking it off when she needed it? Her grades improved. Because the temperature difference was dysregulating. It was external noise that was affecting her focus. And people tend to not think about this stuff. Another case scenario I want to give you, I heard about this a couple years ago from a colleague, that there was a young girl that was really restless in one classroom. And she couldn't contain herself. She was always being corrected. Her grades were stinking. But when she went home, she was fine. Or when she went to another classroom, she was fine. And they couldn't figure out what was going on with this kid. They thought maybe it was something about the teacher. Was it the desk? Was it, typical sensory stuff? Was there too much noise? What was it? And I can't remember who had the epiphany. But with kids that have a ramped up nervous system, like an ADHD, their senses tend to be at 11. Any Spinal Tap fans out there? 11 as opposed to 10, meaning very sensitive. Well, what this young lady was being dysregulated by was the smell of the cleaner that the janitor used to wipe down the desks at the end of every day. It was burning her nose, and she was the only one in the classroom that smelled it. So what'd they do? They asked, I don't remember if they changed the cleaner in the whole school. That would have been incredibly ambitious. I think they just changed the cleaner for that room. And lo and behold, things improved. So again, external noise can require a little archaeological work to find out just what's going on, or it can be something more obvious. Best case scenario, your child can articulate it, or the parent sees something similar at home, and you can bounce it off mom or dad, and they can give you some useful feedback, okay? So that's the kind of noise that can really interfere and sabotage your student, whether they're on meds or not. So it's important to understand that. Now, also think of meds as a first step, not as the step. There are many educators and a lot of parents that really overestimate the power of medication. Medication is really good, as I said, quieting down the internal noise, specifically the three components of ADHD: focus, hyperactivity, impulsivity. Those can really be reduced, not necessarily eliminated, but significantly reduced in a child so that they can be more productive. And that's what we're going to go into next. By productive, I'm talking about executive functions. Things like memory, being able to take the first step in an assignment, initiate a task, organize their homework, prioritize what they're going to do first, second, third, last. Those are things medication doesn't improve, okay? Those are not things that are within the diagnostic criteria of ADHD. So what do? Strategies. Strategies that work around what the brain does not ordinarily do, okay? So one is working memory. Mine sucks, okay? I've been tested. Mine is in the 3rd percentile of working memory. Temple Grandin, if you know her, hers is in the 2% percentile. So she doesn't remember jack. And one of the things that she recommends, which is something I live by, is lists. My youngest son, he has a routine. Every weekend he cleans the bathrooms. He's always forgetting stuff. One weekend, we gave him a list. He totally nailed it. Went through everything, did an immaculate job. Why? Because he didn't have to rely on his working memory to recall everything he has to do. Now, what is working memory? It's the brain's ability to hold in its attention the information it needs to solve the problem before it. So you're given a lot of instructions verbally to your student. If your child is in the 3rd percentile, like me, at working memory, not everything is going to be held. What happens when you try and add more water into a bucket? It starts spilling out water that's already in there, right? So if anything, your student is going to remember the last couple things you said, but not the stuff at the beginning, which is about how to get started. Okay, you with me? It's critical to understand that about working memory. So when a child doesn't know where to begin, and this again is my experience when I was a kid in school, I would often just stare into space like, what the heck am I supposed to do? How does everybody know what to do first? Because I remembered the last couple things and everything in the front got shoved out the back door. If I'd been handed some kind of a list of instructions that said, do this, do this, do this, do this. Now, another thing that came up in the question from our colleague is, well, I explained it to him. I give him the directions. It still doesn't work. Okay, maybe, and I understand this is a little extra work, but we want to help the child succeed here. Maybe the way things are worded is not specific enough. There are some kids that need to have it broken down in terms of how. Like, for example, you tell your kid to vacuum the house, or you ask your child, go hang their coat up, in the school. Some kids need to know what that entails. Some kids might hear that as, put your coat over by the rack, and they'll go over there and they'll drop it. Because if you say, put your coat up or hang your coat up, they'll do it half-assed. But if you tell them specifically, take your coat, hang it on the hook, then you're done. And if they need to practice, repeat that sequence back to you, and most importantly, demonstrate it. Show me. That's how you know they understand. Not because they necessarily said it back, but they also showed you. Taking that action, producing the result. That's how you know that the executive functions have been engaged. They got to do something with what you tell them, okay? Not just say something back to you. Task initiation can be a real booger. Taking that first step. There's something in the ADHD mind where there's some essential inertia, some stuckness, where it's hard for them to transition from one thing to another thing. I'm sure you see this all the time. You also see it in kids with Asperger's. But that stuckness can get in the way of taking the first step to beginning something, a worksheet, reading a couple paragraphs, whatever you've given them to do. So you often need to cue them, or they need to cue themselves by asking the question, what must I do first? I must answer the first question. I must get my pencil out of my backpack. I must open the book to this page, whatever it is. Once they've taken that first action, it's a lot easier for them to take the second and keep moving and break out of that stuckness so they can begin being productive. Again, it's not just an understanding of the directions or spitting back what it is you said. They must take some action. They must produce something in order to demonstrate that they understand what it is you want them to do. Sequencing. How do they determine how to do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7? First of all, I can't sequence to save my life. If I do, it's pure luck, or maybe because I had a little bit more caffeine that day. So I often have to rely on others to help me determine what's the best order things should go in. Now, one problem ADHD kids have is the all or nothing mind again. They see something with 10 questions, and their mind looks at that and says, holy crap, 10. I can't do 10. That's too much. So what will I do? None of it. All or nothing. None of it looks like, I forgot my book at school. Oh, well, the teacher didn't tell us what the homework was, or I conveniently forgot that there's homework. Or, well, I learned to understand it, so I'm just going to go back. Procrastinate, procrastinate, procrastinate. That's the nothing. Because they simply have decided that 10 is too much, therefore, I can't do it. I won't do it. So in order to help them break it down, one of the most simple solutions in the world, put a piece of paper over 2 through 10, so that all they need to do is the first one, then the second one, then the third one. We call that chunking, breaking it down, simplification, whatever it is. Make it less overwhelming so they can focus on that small chunk of information. Solve the first problem, then the second. That makes it so much easier. Last thing, prioritizing. What do I do first? What do I do next? Kids that are older in middle school and high school that have multiple teachers. I just had a client that had 3 tests on the same day. To say she was anxious about that was an understatement. Now, of course, some of this could have been solved by better communication between the teachers. And it ended up being overwhelming for her because she thought in an all or nothing way. Oh my goodness, 3 tests. It's too much. I can't memorize all this stuff. Therefore, I'll freak out and do nothing instead of trying to find a plan. So when she connected with me, I helped her focus. I helped her prioritize, and she calmed down because now the problem was not 3 tests. The problem was, oh, how do I study for this test? How much time do I give myself? How do I prioritize what I'm going to look at? Then when that time is done, I can move on to the next, and so on and so on. Now, I still need to find out how she did in the test, but it was the last day before Christmas break. So I'll probably have to wait till the new year to find out. But this is just kind of 101 on these issues to answer the question that your colleague posed. Of course, we can go deeper. There's always more to this, especially when it comes to tweaking things for the individual student. But hopefully this gives you a better 30,000-foot view of what can be happening to sabotage a child's focus internally and externally. And remember, I'm here to help you. So feel free to ask additional questions to this video, and we'll give you what you need so that you and your student can be successful. This has been Brian. I hope this is of value to you, and we'll talk again soon.